After we completed our linear equations unit, we took about 2 weeks and we went back and just reviewed all of the concepts in order to prepare for your linear unit test. I told you guys to make sure that you use this when you're preparing for your semester exam, because a good portion of your exam will be over linear functions. So a couple of students asked if I would just do a little linear review book video so that you can make sure that your book is completed. Most of you did a great job making sure that you wrote down all the extra notes and that you completed this, because we did it together in class. And then remember, I let you guys use this on the test, so I took it up for a grade. So the front of your book looks like this. I returned it to you in class today. And then when you opened it up, the very first thing you saw was topic 1, which reviewed the different formulas that you were supposed to be aware of. Now don't forget, you don't have to memorize these, because these formulas are actually going to be on your EOC reference materials, so you'll have a formula chart with these on there. The first topic that we reviewed in the book was slope from a graph. And so if you'll remember that when you're given a graph, you really want to make sure that you're utilizing that slope triangle. The slope triangle is a great tool when you have a graph, because you can actually visually count the rise and the run. So it's really good to use that. The other thing that we talked about is doing a visual check. If your line is falling from left to right, then that is going to be a negative slope, and you need to make sure that your slope, the actual number that you're using for your slope, is negative. Then we talked about our horizontal and vertical lines, and we reviewed Hoy-Vux. This comes later also within this linear review book, but you need to make sure that you remember what those letters stand for, because the acronym is no help if you don't know what it means. The next topic in your review book was the slope formula. And so remember, you don't have to have this memorized. It's on the formula chart, but my suggestion is that you guys always start by labeling your points, your x1, y1, and then use your formula so that you can visually see where you're supposed to substitute those values in. I highly encourage you to use a calculator just to make sure your computation is correct. And then last but not least, don't forget to reduce. Today in class, as we were reviewing, one of the things that I reminded you about is that if 0 is underneath, meaning it's on the bottom of your fraction, then your slope is undefined. So remember, underneath and undefined both start with UN. So hopefully that will help you determine which slope is 0 and which slope is undefined if you're using that slope formula. The next topic in your review book was graphing from slope-intercept form. So remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So my suggestion to you is, given your equation, go ahead and identify your slope, which is m, that's the number in front of x, and your y-intercept, which remember that's b, so it's the number that's being added or subtracted. Then you just follow these steps. You're going to plot your y-intercept. You're going to use your slope to rise and run to plot another point, and then you draw that line, making sure that it's extended all the way across your coordinate plane. You guys did a great job with graphing by intercepts. You just need to remember that if you have an equation in standard form, which that means that x and y are on the same side, then you can find the x and y intercepts to graph rather than rewriting it in slope-intercept form. So remember, if you're looking for the x-intercept, you cover up y and solve for x, so x would equal 4 in this case. And if you're looking for the y-intercept, you cover up x and solve for y. So the y-intercept in this case is also 4. And that's how I got these 2 points that I plotted. I plotted the x equals 4 on the x-axis and the y equals 4 on the y-axis, and then we drew our line. Okay? Now be careful when you have something like this second one. Notice when I solved for x this time, when I cover up y, 2x was equal to 2. So I had to get x alone, so that's why the x-intercept became 1. So I plotted a point on 1 on the x-axis. And when I covered up x, negative y equals 2. So to get y alone, I had to divide by a negative, and that's why my y-intercept was actually -2 on that problem. And I plotted it on -2 on the y-axis and drew my line. Here is our review of Hooy-Vux. So remember, a horizontal line has 0 slope, and that's y equals a number. And for Vux, a vertical line has undefined slope, and that's x equals a number. Using these, this little acronym is helpful if you can remember. Okay, so if it's x equals 1, that's going to be Vux. So I know it's going to be vertical, and I know I put my point on the x-axis because it says right there that x equals 1. And then I drew my vertical line. Okay, so just make sure you remember those. Our next concept was a little more tricky. We were using our point slope. So remember, if you're given a point and you're given slope, what you're going to do is you're going to label your point x1, y1, and go ahead and label your slope m. That way, when you use your point slope formula, you can see where those numbers are actually going in the formula because they're already labeled. Then once you plug in your numbers, you're going to simplify if necessary. If they want it in slope-intercept form, you have to solve for y. The next day, we extended that topic a little bit, and we did point slope if you're given 2 points. So remember, those steps are very similar. It's just there's a little extra step because you have to find your own slope using the slope formula. So I would still start by labeling my points x1, y1, and x2, y2. Then you have to use y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 to find your m. And then you go back and you use the point you labeled your x1, y1, and the slope that you just found, and you use that point slope formula. When we talked about parallel and perpendicular lines, I told you guys that the main thing I needed you to memorize were these 2 rules. So remember, parallel lines have the same slope in different y-intercepts. So if they're asking you about lines, you're looking at the slope. If the number in front of x, when it's in slope-intercept, is the same, and the y-intercept is different, then that's when you know you have parallel lines. Perpendicular is a little bit trickier. Remember, perpendicular lines, they cross to form a 90-degree angle. And so they have opposite reciprocal slopes. Opposite means change the sign. Reciprocal means flip the slope. And what that means is, for example, right here, I have a slope of -4/3. The opposite reciprocal of that would be, it would be positive because this one's negative. And the reciprocal means I flip that fraction and it becomes 3/4. So a line that is perpendicular to this line would have a slope of positive 3/4. We wrapped up our linear equations review book by doing some linear applications. So I gave you 4 different types of word problems, and you guys had to use the different forms of a linear equation in order to answer it. So remember, I told you guys that if you're given a starting amount and a rate of change, that's when it's going to be the easiest to use your slope-intercept form. If you're given a point, remember we talked about buddies, numbers that have a relationship, then that's like having a point, and you're given a rate of change, that's when you're going to use your point slope. If you're given 2 points, that's the one that takes a little bit more time because you have to use 2 formulas. First, you have to find your rate of change or your slope, and then you have to use point slope. And then our last type, if you're comparing 2 different objects, utilizing standard form is going to be the best. Please use your linear review book when you are completing your semester exam review. If you are working and you figure out that, hey, like I'm kind of struggling on all these slope questions, open your linear review book and go back to the section on slope and look at the things that we wrote down. Okay, this is not a resource that I expected you to complete and then put away and never look at again. So please use it to study for your exam, and good luck on your tests tomorrow. Y'all have a great night.